Massive thank you as always to our top tier patrons Sarah Turner and Alexander Lashley. For as little as $3 you can gain access to Patreon only episodes as well as access to our Discord server where we host weekly live discussions with host Ikoi Hero and myself. So if you like what you hear, come join us at patreon.com/it's not just in your head. Please do rate us on Apple Podcasts and follow us on social media. We're on Reddit, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you have any questions or comments about this episode or the podcast in general, then email it's not just in your head @gmail.com.
In the mental health field, too often, we've made it seem as if it's just in your head.
The landlord can hijack the rent by 20%. That impacts people's mental health.
Can't have a profit-driven mental health care system if we want our people to be connected and healthy.
Because of the 100th episode, I like the idea of flipping the script and just saying like, okay, when is it not capitalism?
Well, I don't think the script is necessarily when is it not capitalism, but for example, incels would be a classic example of, atomized, lonely people that maladaptively externalize.
Yes, that's a very good point. Also, I really know that in the United States, the problem isn't that people externalize their own problems and make them the fault of society. They've been so programmed to think everything's their fault, bad decisions, this or that they don't organize and think of the social dimension of their problems the way they do in, let's say, a country like France, where they join with others and do something about it. Instead, they have a lot more personal violence because they're frustrated, and they blame themselves. And that's in part what It's Not Just in Your Head was trying to address. Is it the same in the UK or not?
There's definitely a lot of scapegoats, right?
Right.
And
that's a good.
Yeah. And so it's like, because we were going to have a conversation with someone who was previously in a cult, right? And that's still going to happen just in the future. But, as the timings come about as it is, doing a 100th episode, it's kind of interesting because one of the questions that sort of brought up for me was like, how do you know when you're in a cult or not in a cult? And how can you say with certainty that any perspective you have is, correct? Because from where I stand, I see everyone has a scapegoat, right? So how do you make sure that capitalism doesn't become, your number one scapegoat? And then in that you lose, the impression I get from listening to guests and from listening to you two and Max over this period of time is that it's very much about part of the process of going through therapy is very much about empowerment. And there's an empowerment when you organize with a bunch of people against a cruel system, right? But I also wonder, does revealing, if you like, a system that harms people, does that actually disempower people, and or does it have the offshoot effect where people go, it's all capitalism. There's definitely, it's like 100% that, and it's 0% me.
Yeah, except the problem in the therapy field, at least I see, maybe Ikoi, you see it differently, is that people have no awareness of the social forces that are pushing them. All they think of is themselves and blame themselves. And it's empowering to deal with yourself and also see, I'm not a bad person. That isn't why I'm poor. I'm not condemned because I took drugs. There's a lot that you want to escape from, but you can fight it a lot better politically than you can by zoning out on yourself as well as the bad stuff around you. And you need to process it. And so that I think that this program was originally started by Max and then me when he asked me to join it as an antidote to the utter ignorance of our field, the psych field, of social forces acting on people. So it's not just in your head. You're getting evicted. It's not just because you made bad choices. You might have lost your job. You might have gotten injured. You might have come from a neighborhood where the schools are so bad and you never saw yourself as somebody who could succeed. And now you can, but you need empowerment with others. There is such a dearth of that. I know when I even went to my advanced hypnosis seminars that were consisting of very sophisticated long-term therapists, they were so politically dumb. They had no interest in what was going on in the world and how it affected their clients. Also, they see mainly wealthy people because most of them don't want to go through the huge hassle of taking people's insurance. And most insurance doesn't give mental health benefits that are much anyway. So all they see are people who could afford to pay the whole fee.
Right,
But
the cash pay patients.
exactly. Who get better care because a lot of good therapists hate what they make you do with insurance. And so only take people who can pay. And that means wealthy people. So I think we were trying to address this huge ignorance and disinterest in our field about what are the political forces acting on people. So I hope that we don't convey to anybody some idea it's all capitalism, you have no responsibility. You're always stuck with the consequences no matter what it is, and you better do something about it.
Yeah, I think it's brilliantly put.
I guess that's that last part is the difficult part, right? Because to a certain degree, like for example, when you've dealt with when you've worked with people that have pretty severe mental health issues, like extensive homelessness history, a complete lack of basically job skills, right? Things like that, where it's like one stacked on top of the other, right? They do, like, those people do kind of see, pretty quickly, how like the cards are completely stacked against them.
Right.
Systematically, right?
That's right.
A lot of what, is seen as like political activity is like, it's not going to like get me a job now. It's not going to address my immediate pressing survival needs. And to a degree, I think that's where this kind of individualized compartmentalization is very appealing.
Yes, it is. But I must say, in the 1930s, when the country was much more left, one of the things that made the FDR policies change was there were marches of hundreds of thousands of people in the streets of New York demanding jobs and demanding housing and demanding all these things, which they're not going to listen to somebody on the corner who's, drugged out. But if they're threatened because there's so many people and they're screaming, okay. And an individual solution is kind of hopeless for most people, although you need to empower them to look for that and to try to get whatever they can. But I think our problem is not that people just blame capitalism. It's that they blame themselves. That's dangerous too, because it depoliticizes the population.
Do people blame themselves? I mean, maybe on a different layer, but you see a lot of, I don't know, look at what happened in the Capitol riots. I'm pretty sure those people weren't blaming themselves. it was everyone else's fault, right?
Well, I mean, but yeah, I think that's kind of like, what I mean by like a maladaptation, right? Because people aren't necessarily, people are given, practice and, and skill set of kind of trying to, come to a more balanced way of looking at like responsibility to self and others.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So it's one of those things where like usually you kind of tend to see a pattern in people where it's either like, extreme externalization. Where it's absolutely nothing is ever their fault. It's the fault of my wife, my kids, my partner, my husband, my coworkers, my boss, and these are people that often have very little ability to take responsibility. And then you also have the people that blame themselves for everything, right? And so it's kind of like, this society sets people up to either completely avoid responsibility or take on an extreme amount of burden, both psychologically, emotionally, whatnot, right?
That's true. That's how abusive relationships usually work. The man smashes the woman and blames her for being difficult.
Right. Well, because it's also like the same kind of like, why is I have a very, I don't like the modern concept, especially in the recovery community, of like codependency. The reason why that has so much traction, because as a society, we do not grapple very well with like teaching people like, hey, how do you work well with others? How do you take responsibility, right? How do you encourage each other and encourage yourself and like teach all these skills, because you teach people to take a balanced view of like responsibility and commitment to community. Then our leaders and our system starts to look really problematic, right?
It sure does. And capitalism does pit one person in competition against the others. And the basic setup is nobody hires you to work unless they're ripping you off, unless they're making more money off your work than they're giving you. And people feel a sense of loss and they feel cheated. And in the US, they feel more of a sense of loss because the best well-paid manufacturing jobs were sent to China, India, Pakistan, whoever works for about $1 an hour or up to $3. The Chinese made $3, which is more than anyone else in the East or the Middle East. And then you take your wealth home and you buy the political system. And so people, the average person like the Trump follower, the white male Trump follower, had a tremendous loss. Suddenly, he wasn't an honored person in his community with a dependent wife and children, dependent because his family wage allowed it. He didn't have the union behind him. He didn't have a sense of pride in his community as somebody from the local factory where his kid might work also and where his father might have worked. There was a tricky thing in the United States, which is, I think, the big capitalists got kind of scared in the early 70s because we were fighting an unpopular war and there were huge demonstrations against the war in Vietnam. The cities were going up in flames because Black people were enraged at being victimized. Civil rights confrontations were happening everywhere. And women were really angry and out there to try to get abortion rights and equal wages. And so what they decided to do is let's give them multiculturalism. It's fine if there's a couple of Black people, CEOs, and a couple of women and so on. Just don't touch the class system that allows us to profit outrageously. And so they pushed to the right to destroy things like abortion for women, women's rights, Black rights, trans rights, and so on. They gave all these cultural things, which are all important, but they repressed class, which didn't even make a comeback until 2011 when Occupy happened and Obama closed all the Occupies by police edict on the same day because he was elected because although he was the same thing in brown, he was brown. It was progress, but class progress hasn't been made. And Trump's followers were told, you're important. They think you're nobody, but you're somebody, and we'll make you great again, and we'll make America great again, and you're great, rather than you're one of, as Hillary Clinton referred to them, in the basket of deplorables. You're not a deplorable person who has a crap job at a low wage. You're somebody, you're an American. And those people who took it from you, as the right wing says, are those uppity blacks that got rights, and those uppity women who got rights, and those immigrants who are coming in to take your job. And so he spoke to them, even though he doesn't deliver at all. He listened to them. People are lonely. Their government abandoned them. And big government is what saved America. FDR was big government. But starting with Reagan, who started smashing the unions with firing all the air traffic controllers, all 12,000 of them that were on strike, started lowering wages. And then people outsourced decent wages. And there's a great sense of loss. And I think class unity could restore that sense of loss. I also think cults are a way of belonging. I think Trumpism is a kind of cult. And people want to belong. They don't have any place. We had Emily Gindelsberger on our program talking about America's 4 biggest employers: Walmart, Amazon, call centers, and fast food, who are all on the clock every second, measuring their movements, including how often they go to the bathroom, at low wages where they are just an addenda to a robot, and they're dehumanized. And those are the biggest employers. So people are humiliated and they need something, and they shouldn't blame themselves. They can look at what the social forces are and realize we better get together, or else we will just be addendas to robots till they can invent another robot that does what we're doing now. You know, it's a strange time, particularly in America, where people feel huge loss, both personal, because the family and marriage have fallen apart, but also social, because the social prestige they had at their long-term jobs and the ease of getting a job. And for white people, who were the majority before, overwhelmingly, a job that paid decently, that's gone. And I think people are blaming themselves because they're encouraged to blame themselves rather than organize and do something.
Mm. Yeah, Ikoi and Penny, for your thoughts.
I don't have much differences in that. I think, ultimately, I mean, people call Trumpism a cult, but, I think any kind of extreme, adherence to parties kind of make up that mindset, because, Clintonism is a cult in itself as well. But it's one of the things about like these, oftentimes political, kind of cults, right, is that they don't provide the kind of community that people really need, oftentimes.
Right. But they do provide something.
They do provide something. I mean, that's why, religion is still, it's a force, because it provides, and addresses a lot of people's needs, whether, you agree with any specific teachings or whatnot, right?
That's true.
People do have an inherent need to, and that's the sad thing about like a lot of the hyper individualism, right? Is that people have an inherent need to belong. People have an inherent need to, at least some level of community and connection in some way, right? And the sad thing is that we as a society do not provide, the practice and the skill set to make these easy for people, right? That's one of the major issues in therapy, is that like a lot of times, one of the things that I, always kind of focused on, because in addiction, and basically like, a lot of times people in distress situations are often isolated people.
Yes.
Right. That these kind of go hand in hand. And a lot of times, in terms of like isolation, right, and talking to isolated people, it really is striking, because this isn't something that you can tell visually, right? I mean, aside from people maybe not having a nervous breakdown, but, people can be in distress and look very put together and you would never know.
Human beings are wired as social animals. Our brains require social development to grow, because we're not the strongest animals or the swiftest animals. We don't have the best eyesight, the best hearing, anything. What we have to exist is the ability to connect with one another and work as a group. That's why we survived. And when people are isolated and lonely, their brains start being alarmed, because for most of human history, if you're alone, your goose is cooked. You need other people to survive. And so we start producing cortisol and other stress hormones that erode our bodies, which is one of the reasons that lonely people die sooner and get so many more diseases. They say that loneliness is equivalent to smoking 15 packs a day. 15 cigarettes a day, not 15 packs, and not eating fruits and vegetables or fiber. That it's devastating because of the chemicals secreted when we're alone.
Right. We're absolutely. I mean, inflammation is one of the causes of a lot of issues within the body, and it's also and that's where isolation is often kind of the key to exacerbating maladaptive behaviors, right?
Totally. Every mass shooter is described as a loner. Everyone. I did research on them, because connection is mental health.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's often again, that's the difference of when you're just distressed, do you externalize it or do you internalize it? You can do both.
Mm-hmm.
You can also do both. Some people do both, but, people tend to lean in one direction more than the other usually, right? But that's kind of one of the major aspects of isolation is that maladaptive behavior gets worse, gets exacerbated, and you don't have people around you, right? I mean, all of us kind of, it's one of those things where there is something to, a bunch of my friends that were very, very social, prior to the pandemic. And then, after kind of socially, distancing for a while, they were like, oh, being around people is so weird.
Yeah, right? It is.
And they were really social people beforehand, so this was really weird for them, because they're I usually love this and it's weird and I need to get used to this, right? But that's kind of the effect of isolation is that you kind of lose, I mean, a lot of it is
lose social skills.
You absolutely lose social skills, you become more anxious around people
and more aggressive. There's the famous mouse experiments where they take a little mouse, leave it alone for a month or so, then they introduce another mouse, and then the original alone mouse immediately attacks the other mouse. And they started then doing studies on human beings. After they're isolated, they're more hostile and angry. And I think it's because they're thwarted in a basic need, which is connection with others. And
right. And oftentimes also isolation. Isolation when it is kind of a result of, kind of something external, like an accident, illness, right? That kind of keeps you homebound is one thing. But I think for social species, a lot of times kind of isolation has a built-in kind of internal mechanism to it where in the wild, a lot of times you're isolated for a reason, right? Your pack either thinks you have a disease, you've done something bad.
Die. That's right.
And so it's also one of the aggression type is that if you've been kicked out of your group, right? Your group is kind of at that point like your enemy. Like if you run into them in the wild, they might kick your ass and injure you, right? So you're going to be more defensive, absolutely a lot more aggressive in that way. And I think that kind of is also the case in some ways for people, especially people if you've had experience of being bullied, of social anxiety, of feeling, a lot of anxiety around socialization, negative experiences around socialization, feeling like you've never belonged, right? And there can be like these, because you come into you work with these types of issues within people, and oftentimes it's like a combination of like I'm a piece of shit and also like I hate everybody because they've been bad to me, right? Yeah, because and none of these are again like things that like are imagined by these people, because it's a result of like right it's a result of just these like really bad experiences, and a lot of projection that often comes from that, a lot of and so a lot of times working with these individuals, you kind of have to get them to one kind of like give up projections around other people, that like people are always going to be and kind of start taking these measured and building up really cooperative behaviors in people.
Yes, and that takes work, but everyone is suffering loss except for the 1%. So people are also abandoned. In the United States, we have the most COVID in the world. New Jersey actually has the most COVID in the world, when they are the pharmaceutical production capital of the United States. But people have been abandoned in terms of their health, since Americans have terrible COVID health, and they've been abandoned by their government in terms of earning a living. They've been abandoned by the economy, and they feel the loss. And now with the pandemic, they also feel the loss, and the basic units of connection, whether they were the union, whether they were the family, whether they were marriage itself, even sex is much less frequent now in the United States. People are atomized, which is a terribly lonely, mentally unhealthy state, which is why we have the most mass murders, where people are literally so angry and hostile, they just want to pick off random people. That's quite the pathology.
There's a bleak picture being painted, right, where you have Trump running again for 2024. You've described how being isolated from other people leads to all these kinds of problems, that you have to relearn basically how to socialize, how to work with other people. And the only thing that's going to stop something like Trump, the Democrats from the stuff that I've seen,
absolutely useless.
Useless. So it looks really bleak, because what is going to happen? Like, what are people going to do? Like, is it a resigned like, oh, here he comes again, or is it like there has to be some collective?
People are fighting. People are connecting and fighting all over New York. There are abortion rights demonstrations. There are union drives like there haven't been for 50, 75 years. People are banding together. Unions have taken a huge boost. Most people in America now approve of unions, and all sorts of sectors that never thought that they even belonged in a union, because they never thought they were workers, are now unionized. Like the Chicago Art Institute is entirely unionized. It's workers. The people, Grinnell College in Ohio, everyone is organized who works there. The tech assistants and student teachers in the entire University of California system are unionized. There's 100 Starbucks that are unionized. All these people are unionized who never even thought of themselves as regular workers, because they know they have to join to do something for their lives. And I think that's very hopeful.
Well, it's sort of like what Jason Miles was saying, which was about that it doesn't matter who's in power, right? Like they're going to just do stuff anyway. Yeah. And I think the threat of what's on the horizon has, it does. I think it probably does matter who's in power to some degree, or like the potential of who's going to be in power. But I like the sentiment. I think is bang on. It's like you don't wait for the right person to be in power or try and get the right person in power. You sort of actively try and do something about it.
I think one of the things that has happened on a big level that has influenced everyone is that the American empire is dying. Empires rise and they fall. And the British Empire has already died. But I think people have to adjust. The Queen is silly, all that money to pretend the monarch rules. Of course she doesn't. It's all gone down.
How dare you?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think the best idea I've heard is that you remove funding from the royal family in the current way that they get it. But what you do is you let them continue to be a performing arts group, and they just have to apply for sort of creative funding. So that way the tourists can still come and sort of watch them perform being royals, and we still get to have all the sort of costumes and all the fun and all that stuff. But they don't, you sort of decapitate their power.
Yes.
Which
or
I think
the pretense.
Yeah, I think it's a lot. I think that, that's a win-win as far as I'm concerned.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, but I think, I just want to circle back, like all the way back to the beginning, which is this, and maybe this isn't useful, or maybe it is, because I think we have explored this idea of responsibility or where you're placing it or whatever. But it's interesting that it's a tool that's often used by the right wing as like the go-to thing that maybe they stand for in some sort of political sense, is like personal responsibility and success or failure that goes with that. When it comes to actually defining sort of a healthy perspective around the things you can control and the things that you can't, do you have like personal working definitions, either of you, about what you actually think responsibility is, or what it actually looks like? I mean, you mentioned sort of essentially playing well with others. I just wondered if there was more to that.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, right? That like we have grown up in such a punitive society. I mean, a huge part of like this excess focus on personal responsibility is because we have no way of like, doing any kind of rehabilitation or reparation or all these things, because, it's your personal responsibility.
Right. Exactly.
Right. And so it's one of those things where it's kind of,
it's the only game in town kind of thing. It's like the only option.
Right. And that's kind of why, sometimes people don't necessarily like my position, but this is why I kind of take a blanket position on, when it comes to a lot of criminal issues. Like, we should just treat everybody. Right. Because again, like this personal responsibility kind of gets factored into like deserving, are you deserving of care?
Exactly. And that there's something wrong with you if you have a problem. I also think that
it's both, right? It's both. Like there's only decent, good, moral people deserve treatment. Everyone else deserves punishment. So there's one aspect of that. And then there's also like this, if you need help, you're a piece of shit.
Exactly.
Right.
A huge part of a lot of what's fucked up about society is that, like, in it while it is consistently awful, there is also pretty severe gross inconsistencies. So you make people ashamed of seeking help, right? But you also tell people that like help is only for the right people, and that wrong people don't deserve help.
And you're wrong if you have a problem, because capitalism means they don't want to take care of you. You either function or you're dead in the water. That's why children are killed all the time. And the fines for killing your kid are like 6 months, not capital punishment. And every week you hear about how people killed their kid. And old people are neglected because they can't produce for capitalism either. It's a very unkind society. And I think the way out is to join together and demand a kinder society. And that it's your job to be politically informed and politically active, because you're part of this and you need other people to make it be better.
How people go about that is going to, and I think that's also, like, for example, a lot of people in the anti-abortion movement, right, would say that, like, they are trying to, save babies and improve for a kinder, more compassionate society, right?
Yeah, although that's ironic that the states with the worst maternal health outcomes and the least supports for early nutrition.
Right, because those are personal responsibility, right? Again, like,
that's right.
This is your personal responsibility. Like, it was one of those things where it was kind of striking when the Roe versus Wade overturning was happening. I was just kind of like trapezing around all over, Twitter and social media, not necessarily commenting very much, but just kind of like looking at a lot of arguments that people are saying, and like there were so many people that are like, oh, anytime you have sexual intercourse, it is implied consent for pregnancy.
Yeah, well, I think that they should go further than that and say, anytime a man jerks off, he's guilty of genocide. That's 6 million sperms. And he should be held accountable for mass murder.
That's brilliant.
Because one aspect of like this personal responsibility, culture is also one that is like really devoid of any kind of joy. I think ultimately, we are a country of festering unmet needs, right?
And it's a beautiful statement.
And corporate parties, who are ultimately, right, not interested in people, or incapable.
No, they're interested in making a profit. That's right. Their whole reason for being. That's why we have an inflation. It isn't supply chain.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, the other thing here is that there is this book called "Capital as Power," and the point that they're making in the book is that profits aren't what capitalists are doing. That isn't actually the end game. The end game is just power, and profits are just a sort of relative metric of power.
Right. And there is, one of the major reasons why, metrics like, enjoyment and joy and I don't like to use the word happiness, but like enjoyment, enjoying life, right, in general is such a neglected concept, is that immiseration is often, what gives you power. Your ability to immiserate people. People will say things like, well, I don't understand why, the miserable like social conservatism of conservatives is like, like that's kind of like inherently unproductive, right? And
yes.
I think people underestimate how much power comes, unfortunately. Like if you immiserate people, they have less ability. That's why they spend so much time and energy immiserating people.
Also, because it's profitable at the same time. It's certainly profitable not to give them any money. But in France, recently, there's been a very different in France, Argentina, Colombia, and Chile. But most recently in France, Mélenchon, the left candidate, united everyone. And that's why he won the majority of the parliamentary seats that anybody won, and now is a huge power because the feminists, the climate change people, the race equality people, the sexual equality people all joined together. the big unions, which are powerful in France, they all joined together for a leftist government. And so in that way, they transferred power. And the first legislation that they passed under his pressure was a 15% increase in the minimum wage. And the second was a 10% increase for all civil servants. And that's their agenda is going to be to serve everybody. The same thing happened in Chile. And the same thing happened more recently in Colombia. Both Chile and Colombia now have leaders who were former guerrilla fighters against the fascistic governments before. And in Colombia, the president was a guerrilla fighter. The vice president is a Black woman who's trying to organize and has tried to organize house workers, domestic labor, and they want to include everyone. But they've included everyone. I think in the US and in England, if ordinary people want to have anything, they all have to get together under a class umbrella with different spokes that go out in every area, because otherwise we'll be dismembered from one another, each pushing alone for our own cause. But I think it pays to try to get that unity because people have won. That's how they won abortion rights in Argentina. Even though the Pope himself showed up in Argentina, because he's Argentinian, to try to get them to vote against abortion rights. But they had the indigenous people, labor, women, Black people, climate activists all together in a unity for abortion rights. And that unity will also be for the labor rights, for sexual rights, for racial rights, and so on. That's really something that's been happening that's very hopeful. That doesn't show up in the American media much, but it's very exciting.
Like a lot of times, also in the news media, it's kind of shown like, these people just kind of like show up overnight and whatever. And that's not the case, right? Like, Mélenchon has been in politics for a really long time. I think he started in 76. I mean, he joined the Socialist Party in like 76. And then like he's been working, in politics in various contexts since like around 83. So like, this isn't like, somebody that just kind of like came out of nowhere. He's been working for,
That's true.
But
last time his party ran alone, just his party, they didn't win. The fascists got more. They got 22% of the vote. The fascists got 23.1% of the vote. This time, they got a lot more than the fascists, who have, I think, about 79 seats, whereas he has 133, because they joined with all the other groups, which they hadn't before.
And that's also like, strategy, right? That, they're not doing the same thing over and over. They're trying different things and seeing what sticks, right? Versus it feels like too many people narrow down politics to the presidential race and maybe the state senate race. Even if you never vote on anything, right? Just working on like improving your community in some way.
Right, and joining with others. It is very
political, right? Even if it is like, you and like a bunch of like-minded people would like to address homelessness in your community in humane ways, right? I mean, that's political action. Voting isn't the only thing about politics.
Of course.
No, and I guess the reason that the political party stuff is so in the foreground of conversations like this, or just generally, is it has some sort of power over everyone's brain about like what the horizon of possibility is. And I think it's actually more empowering to go, it doesn't matter. we're gonna as a collective, we're gonna try and push this particular thing, like screw the stuff we can't control.
Right. Well, and it's also one of those things where I think, like, for example, it can be a lot mobilizing to have a clear opponent, right? It's one of those things where, like, immigration and things like that was a much more of an issue when Trump was,
because he
in power.
directed people's hatred
Right.
there.
Sure. Right. But then, it's one of those things where once Biden kind of, came in, right, that issue kind of completely faded for, a lot of people, except for, like, the immigration lawyers and activists, where that is, their core issue. Right.
Right.
And that's kind of one of the major aspects of, like, what gets seen as political versus not political.
Exactly. And a lot should be seen as political, as you say.
Right. I mean, if all people ever do is just, like, vote for the president, like, that's not a political, like, walking the poll and pushing a button every 4 years is nothing.
No, it's nothing. And it doesn't contribute to the activism that actually changes things. Because people have to be mobilized if they want to change anything.
Right. I mean, it's one of those things where it's not like Republican lawmakers without any, help from the population overturned Roe versus Wade. That's 50 years of very, very active, constant activism that brought this on, So I really kind of sometimes despise this, the way that some people kind of frame it is like, this easy flip that Republicans did. It still
they've
took
been
50
working
years
for 50 years on this. They really have.
Right. Yeah, they really, really have. I mean, I lived and watched that entire, right? Because that's always been a big issue for me. So I've kept up with all the legislation and just, I mean, yeah. So it's, like I said, a lot of people kind of have a very narrow view of what
they do. And Americans are pushed into that political is voting, even though we don't even have proportional representation. So the proportion that votes for someone is heard.
Right. And not just even like, it's just voting on the president, right? It's not voting on, like, your local, right, rent control measures that may be, on the ballot or things like that.
That's right. And it's also voting for two people who could raise about $4 billion and were chosen by established parties that are and dependent on corporate donations. So you have a choice of two big capitalist funded people, not much of a choice.
Like people fixate so much on presidency, one for the symbolism, but it's also because, like, when people don't have a lot of experience with especially, like, people my age, I'm in my 40s, but they don't have a experience of, like, a successful political movement very much.
That's right. Older people have had that.
Right. Versus, like, Gen X and below have not. And it's also one of those things where I feel like, loneliness is also, like, what makes doing a lot of these, like, because a lot of times you see all these, groups kind of come together with the best of intentions, right? And, like, there's always, like, a lot more internal, things, just personality conflicts, whatnot, that kind of, like, flatten a lot of what could be really good, activity moving forward.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of that is because, again, like, isolated people do not know how to cooperate, and I'm not necessarily, like, exempting myself. I'm kind of, I tend to like to keep my own company. A lot of times I'm not the most social people, but that's also why, like, I always treated political activity like a job. And I don't mean that in a joyless kind of way, but it's just like, I'm just there I'm there to do a role.
Yes.
And I
in
tend to
society and to help in society.
Right. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, like, what do you need? What am I good at? Right. Let's see where those two kind of combine. And I show up to do that. And then whatever else that may need to be done in conjunction with that. But that's kind of, how I personally, approach things in a way that's most productive for me.
No, it makes very good sense.
Right.
Very good,
Because my forte is not necessarily leadership or whatever, these soft skills. It's like, yeah, you want me to file papers? I'll come in and file papers.
Yeah, whereas I have been an organizer since I was in high school. I've been politically active because I felt like I wanted to be part of the process as well as to do something useful. But there's so many ways we can participate, and they're all valid.
Right.
And I think that's also, it's interesting, this idea of that the younger generation doesn't have evidence of success.
Yes.
In terms of political stuff.
Right.
The thing that
I haven't.
Go on.
I don't remember anything. I mean, like every political activity that policy activity that I've participated in, has there's it's not like a complete loss, right? Like a huge part of marijuana legalization, also like decades and decades of work from a lot of activists. So there has been some wins, but there has also been like huge issues within the legalization framework of like, why do we still have people locked up for selling if it's now legal to sell? Things like that.
It struck me as just interesting. Maybe I don't know enough details here, but when I was reading up about the founder of the Moonies, it struck me as like, well, this is a dude who's being pretty bold, right? It's like, I am basically Jesus 2.0, right? And there's something there's something kind of genius about it, which is like, rather than traditionally
reinvent the wheel.
Well, rather than traditionally work your way up some sort of social hierarchy, right? Instead, you say, I'm the top of the hierarchy, and you just need to believe it, right?
Right.
And that's insane in some ways, but it's saying I'm not going to play that game. I'm just inventing my new game, and you're going to follow me. And I'm already the winner. I don't have to prove it to all of you because I've made my own game where I'm the winner already. And the fact is that people believed it, which is kind of the kind of crazy thing. And then obviously that just reinforces the crazy thing. So it's like, is there a lesson to be learned there?
That's the huge lie of meritocracy. That we say that we recognize talent and we recognize hard work, and that this culture values hard workers. Huge aspect of how that is a lie, right? Is how because it's not just the Moonies, but just like prosperity gospel in general.
Exactly.
Right? Is absolutely has very little to do with believing in the system and working your way up. And a lot of it is just audacious, pompous personality that's, kind of, that has enough charisma or gift of gab, to attract.
Yeah, like Trump.
Right. I mean, and even Trump is kind of like a media made product.
But why can't you have that on the left? Like audacious, like over the top, like just, I'm going to set the rules. And fucking, we're going to go for it. I mean, why not? Like maybe part of the despair is just a lack of imagination in terms of like doing mad shit.
Well, also the left doesn't want to deceive people, and things like that depend on a mass deception. And one of the problems with the left, which can be a strength, but is also a problem, is they only appeal to rationality and not to passion. And we need more passion. I mean, Trump's followers all wear the same outfit, so they feel bonded and they feel together and they chant together and they sing together. And the left needs a lot more of that.
Well, and that's where it comes back to the joy thing.
All-time religion.
Right. Well, it's all-time religion. It's also that conservatives tend to, be a lot more accepting of authoritarianism.
Yes, they do. They tend to want to believe in the great leader and not themselves.
And that's one of the, I guess, aspects of the left, is that, we are a collection of various people with various kind of, ambivalence towards different kinds of authority.
That's right. I totally agree.
Right. Because I mean, even like Stalinists, right? If you take that part of the left, because I have friends that, would identify as that sector, right? Like they're still kind of very ambivalent of different types of authority, right? They definitely don't like American imperialism authority versus like, the conservatives do have a strength in that they do have a very easy, cohesive authority figure that can be conjured, right?
That's true. The left's more democratic. It is. It wants everyone to have a voice, and that comes with a price.
Right. I mean, and yeah, it's basically about, trying to, I mean, that's why like, trickle down economics was even like an acceptable thing for conservatives, right? Because it's a ridiculous concept,
Totally.
But yeah, the left is not, I don't think we could have, an audacious unifying figure as easily.
Not as easily, although we did have Williams Jennings Bryan, who got over 1 million votes in jail as a socialist in the 1900s. But I do think that also the left unified in the 30s under the Communist Party and the Socialist parties, the two socialist parties, and it's possible. And I certainly hope we can, because I don't feel we'll have the strength to make the changes we need to see and to save the United States or England unless we do.
Yeah, or the other sort of dark thing you could take from this is that the left just has to be forced to be more subservient.
Oh, I don't think so. I just think they have to have disciplined leaders who don't allow this crap and say, hey, we need each other. Let's not degenerate into microaggressions. We need each other. We'll work it out. We need to change things. And if you care more about your little point than you care about winning, get out of here,
Well, that's always kind of a difficult thing with, I think, again, like that's one of the strengths of the conservatives, right? Is that they kind of have a unified goal.
And they make everyone conform to it.
Right. And versus, on the left, it is, again, like a collection of various people. Right. Various
and
people with various interests.
Afraid to be seen as repressing anyone, even if somebody should be actually shut up,
Right, yeah. Well, I'd love to do a podcast on left people that should shut up.
Right. When I was in women's liberation, at the very beginning, had this rule that everybody loved, and we practice it. Everyone is welcome in our meetings as long as they don't know exactly what the rest of us have to do. Then they have to get out immediately, because everyone deserves a voice. But then leaders always emerge, even if you say we have no leaders, because some people have the courage to move out more and other people don't. But they have to be, I think it has to be explicit and accountable.
Right.
Leadership.
And transparent, consistent.
Yes, transparent and accountable, totally. And the left needs that. We really need that.
I think any basically functioning organization needs that. Like nothing works without it.
That's right.
And I think that's one aspect of just a lot of we're the latchkey generation, right? The Gen X is our, we joke that like we're the generation that raised ourselves.
Yeah.
Because that's, the generation where like a bunch of, mothers went into the workforce full time.
Right.
Right. And one aspect of that, I think, is, again, kind of like, the start of lack of community in some ways.
Yeah, well, I think
lack of cohesion,
a factor I never thought of. Yeah.
But that's kind of like the lack of the cohesion, right? And then, and to a certain degree, like, because a lot of, people my age are now helicopter parents, right? They've kind of gone like the other flip side into, over micromanagement.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what, you see in a lot of the left, right? Is that, there's a certain level of disorganization and micromanagement at the same time. And it can be a very kind of, chaotic environment and observation.
Yeah, and also very boring because people get turned off because you're not doing anything. You're just having all this little conversations. And when people join because they really want to do something. It's boring and stupid. You do need someone to make sure that things work.
Well, and I think sometimes, that's the benefit of having like very local goals.
And making sure that you get to them. But it does also take some discipline. You really have to be disciplined to make sure you keep people on topic. There's a joke. What is a camel? And the answer is a horse put together by a Democratic committee, right? Doesn't work.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, we are the society of atomized
individuals. And yet, lonely people desperate to connect. And that's what Trump shows, that these people are desperate to connect. And they feel like they're in a group going to his rallies in the same outfit and chanting the same things. And people do need to be connected. And we need desperately to do something about that loneliness in the way we talk to people.
Massive thank you as always to our VIP patrons, Alex Placito, Bruce Rogers-Vaughan, Jennifer Cox, Justin Harper, Rebecca Johns, Seamus O'Connell, and Sheena Bilmus.
If you have enjoyed anything you've heard Harriet say in this program, you will definitely enjoy Capitalism Hits Home, which is a solo program that Harriet does through Democracy at Work, which is a worker-owned cooperative that produces other great programs such as Economic Update with Richard Wolff and the Anti-Capitalist Chronicles with David Harvey. I can't recommend enough that everyone also listen to Capitalism Hits Home if you enjoy It's Not Just in Your Head.
And you can hear more from Harriet on her radio show called Interpersonal Update. It's on WBAI at 2:30 EST on Wednesday afternoons and in the WBAI archives.